যাও পাখি বলো, হাওয়া ছলো ছলো, আব ছায়া জানলার কাঁচ। আমি কি আমাকে হারিয়েছি বাকে, রূপকথা নাচ কানাচ। আঙুলের কোলে জলে জোনাকি, জলে হারিয়েছি কান শোনাকি। জানলায় গল্পেরা কথা মেঘ, যাও মেঘ চোখে রেখো এ আবেগ। যাও পাখি বলো, হাওয়া ছলো ছলো, আব ছায়া জানলার কাছ। আমি কি আমাকে হারিয়েছি বাকে, রূপকথা নাচ কানাচ।
My grandmother, my Didima, would tell me stories whenever I got the chance to visit her in Bangladesh. Though I didn't get to spend that much time with her, those stories are what I have left of her in my memories. South Asian culture is so incredibly diverse. There are hundreds of languages, unique traditions, and different religions across the subcontinent. However, Western media lumps all of them together as Indian, and the diversity gets blurred. With a population well over 1 billion people, surely there would be more accurate portrayals of South Asians on screen. But unfortunately, not really. South Asians are typically depicted as smart with thick accents like Baljit from Phineas and Ferb and Ravi from Jessie, but we're all unique and creative, just like any other person. On top of that, also identifying as a woman already has its issues in the film and TV industry. From blatant misogyny to sexual harassment, there's no shortage of sexism. We all have stories to tell, and everyone should have the equal opportunity to get that chance. Through any medium, by word of mouth, through poetry, singing, filmmaking, but the world doesn't give everyone an equal chance. We are encouraged to follow our dreams, to soar and reach for the stars. But how can we if the world is so cruel and unfair? I want my dream to be tangible, but I don't see too many people like me on screen. So do I really have a shot? I scoured through people I know and found someone who was able to break through the sound barrier and navigate her way into the industry. So I asked her if she wanted to be interviewed.
My name is Gayatri Patel Ball. I was born in Nashville, raised in Alabama, went to college in Atlanta, Georgia, and dropped out, and then actually pursued being a Bollywood actress for 7 years in Bombay. And then now I'm here in New York City.
Very cool. And what things have you worked on?
I recently worked on FBI Most Wanted, Partner Track. I've been on Law and Order. I directed a film that is now on Disney a short film that's on Disney Hotstar in India, actually. And so I've done a slew of TV appearances.
Very cool. And what was your upbringing like with your family?
So I'm from an immigrant family in Alabama. I'm Gujarati, and so my dad's a doctor, actually, and which is very different. I mean, which is a whole another sort of layer to this whole thing, right? But he's a doctor, and we ran motels. So we lived in a motel for till I was like 9, and then moved to a house at 9. But we still ran a motel right next to us, and so I grew up sort of, while they ran the motel, and my dad was a doctor at the same time. My mom was running the motel. We grew up sort of just like in the motel, helping, cleaning, doing the whole motel thing.
And what got you interested in like film?
I was in Alabama, there was this like dance competition, Indian dance competition, which was like 3 hours away in Dothan, Alabama. And so when I was like 6 years old, I was really interested. I really wanted to perform at it. And so my parents got this family friend to teach me a dance, and I went, and then I won the whole competition, and then I won the next 2 years as well. And then I was like, well, this seems like a good way to figure out what I want to do with my life. And so I my parent, I watched a lot of TV Asia, like, Madhuri Dixit and Devi. And
Hmm.
so I was like, great, this is it. I'll just be a Bollywood actor. That's a great plan. And I really was, I think, really determined and clear that that's what I was going to do. And in fact, I think when I was 12, I told my aunt that, and she was like, have you talked to your parents about this? And I was like, yeah. And my dad's like a big risk taker, and he really wanted me to do things a little differently. So my dad was actually very supportive, and was a big part of why I ended up dropping out of Emory. I went to Emory in Atlanta, and I dropped out and moved to Bombay to be an actor. So that's how I became an actor. I just thought that that was what I was going to do. That was my talent.
That's so cool. What made you choose like Bollywood instead of like Hollywood?
Total lack of representation. I think also there was this like misconception that like Hollywood was very vulgar compared to Bollywood. And one of my biggest shocks when I arrived in Bollywood was that there was a lot of vulgarity in Bollywood that we had sort of like wrapped in this like beauty, in this bow of like bahus and family dramas, and one is we didn't see people like us on TV in those years, and it really felt like there was no place for us. And second, it felt like it was a place that didn't support our culture. And of course, a lot's changed since then. A lot. We are definitely, there's progress. There's progress in a way that's very different, for your generation.
Hmm. For sure. How's your experience as a South Asian woman in the film industry influence your work and career choices?
I don't know if what's interesting about being an actor is we don't really pick the roles we get. We audition for a ton of things, and you're kind of just still like begging until you're a star. And I'm not a star. And so a lot of times I'm kind of going with what I get, and I'm trying to give the best version of me to those projects. So as an artist, as a performer, it's not, I don't have as much control. What I do have more control over is the work I create as a director or writer. In which case, like the short film I made, it did the festival circuit here, and it had like sort of a South Asian twist to it. It was about an Indian classical, a woman who's haunted by an Indian classical dancer. And I really wanted to sort of create something that could do the festival circuit, that had this Indian component, but that wasn't about being Indian or being South Asian. And
Mhm.
so I do think like the biggest like change in our generation is going to be, this generation has to write their own work. I think that's the biggest like realization of our generation. Is I think we grew up thinking, and I have a bunch of friends who are in the same boat as me. We're like the early adapters. We started this 20 years ago. We showed up 20 years ago, and there was nothing for us. There were no roles written for us, and we thought it was because it was our problem. Do you know what I mean? We thought we weren't good enough.
Uh-huh.
There were just no roles written for our identities that made sense. And um, only in the last couple of years that has it become so clear that our identities are multi-layered, multifaceted, and like narratives need to be written by people of color, by people of all of our different cultures, to actually provide roles to actors and artists where they have a choice. Because I don't have a choice right now, really. And as an actor, the most choice in the matter is me showing up to the work. That means showing up to an audition, presenting myself in a way that gives you sort of like an idea of where I would go. But that's like subliminal messaging. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like I'm not like sitting here being like, I'll do this, I won't do this. And I think that's a misconception about artists in general, because we read about like Brad Pitt or something, or like someone famous in the newspapers, and we're like, he chose this or he chose that. But the average artist, the average actor doesn't have a lot of choice, until you're like a star, which is
Uh-huh.
just so rare.
I see. How do you feel about Mindy Kaling? Because I wrote a little bit about her in my essay.
Oh, you did. I think Mindy's doing great work. I think she doesn't need to represent everyone. There's a lot of pressure on her to create work that seems to represent everybody, because she is the only writer. She's one of the first who sat down and said, I'm going to now make work that I care about, and I'm a brown girl, So now, but I think she wrote according to her own experience, which represents a good sect of people, but not everyone. So everyone just needs to write more work,
Mhm.
it's we don't have a lot of writers in our community, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that you're Bangladeshi, but the first generation of South Asians that were here before you, because Bangladeshis came later. Like I believe your community has come to America in
Like
recent
like
times,
80s, 90s.
80s, 90s, right? So a lot of our parents came in like the late 60s and the late 70s, but they were all the model minority. They were doctors, engineers, lawyers, and they then brought over other people. But what that meant is all the artists are in India. Now you have like your community, and I meet a lot of people from the Bangladeshi community who have like much more of this, like they have much more of a almost like an artistic approach to things, right? And a lot of that has to do with like what your family's doing, what type of work they're doing, because then you just have like a different, you're not completely like immersed in this like money world.
And when a lot of Bangladeshis immigrated here, they came through the lottery system. It wasn't because of like their jobs. So they didn't really
Interesting.
have any like big giant careers to really like make a bunch of money here.
So I guess the question was, what do I think about Mindy? But what was the follow-up question?
I mean, I was just saying how I talked about her within my like essay because from the different people, like I read a bunch of different articles about her to like, back up like the different things I saw. So there's a lot of people who like put a lot of pressure on her, as you said. And I enjoy Mindy's work. And like there are times where she kind of like plays into like some stereotypes a bit too much. Like, have you
Mhm.
watched Never Have I Ever?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like, the stereotype of like being super smart, being very like pretentious.
I think a lot of that just has to do with it just really goes back to the community of the initial community that came over. So everyone was smart. They were smart in that particular way, which was
Hmm.
like brainy, math and sciencey, because all our parents pretty much did that, right? But then when you have a different sect, and this is why I do think the Bangladeshi community is coming out to be more creative quicker than all of us, because there's like much more, because it's a lottery, there's more chance that we got some artists over, some natural generational artists, because I find myself cultivating art. My dad had like an artistic streak, but if you were a true artist in Bombay, you stayed in India, and you made art there. And there are great artists in India because I met them, I hung out with them for 7 years. And so I think stereotypes also, like some of them they come from some sort of like reality too. So how people feel about that, again, I think everyone is entitled to their opinion. As an artist, if something angers you, go make it, right? Go write something about someone who's not super smart, just create more variety out there. But creating things is really difficult. Taking them to completion is difficult. Taking them all the way to production is difficult. So that, creating an army of South Asian creatives is what we need.
Yeah. And have you faced any like challenges being a South Asian woman within like American film or like TV?
I think the biggest challenge is that there isn't enough work written for me. That is my single biggest challenge, is that, there aren't enough projects written that scream like, let's cast Gayatri, right? It's like, instead, for a while we were trying to squeeze ourselves into like a Rachel, and be like, I could be a Rachel, I could be a
Yeah.
Jane, why not? Like, what's the difference? I'm American too. And it's like, no, the narrative needs to be much more layered. There have to be never have I ever's for for these roles to like actually be written for our community. Otherwise, it just opens up the net so wide, you know it's so hard to land these jobs, because it's not just brown people, it's like Latino people, black people, like it's America's a melting pot, and the more specific you get, the more specific the stories get, the more chances of South Asian creatives and actors specifically actually getting cast in those parts. in India, I found it, I know you didn't want to talk about India, but
No,
I
no,
do
it's
find,
fine.
we're hitting a point where things are becoming global. Priyanka Chopra suddenly here, she's been here, but things are global now. It's changed in a way. When I left India 11 years ago, I left an industry that didn't seem to really actually be connected to here. But in the last 10 years, things have changed so drastically because of streaming services and the worldwide. I mean, like, look at what just happened at Coachella, And I think we have to realize that things are now like merging in this amazing way. And so I found actually India more difficult for me. I found it was very difficult for me as somebody who relates as being Indian. But when I got there, they told me I was not Indian. They were like, no, you're American. But here I'm not American. And what by American, like, what does that mean?
Hmm.
So I think that sort of the issue with us as children of immigrants, that that little small little pocket, because it doesn't last long, because then our children are completely different again. It's like we need that representation more than anybody. It's such a small, like, you get to India, they don't care about Indian Americans, they don't care about us, but that's a massive market that we're missing out on as well. So sort of this lost little group of people
Yeah.
that don't get represented.
Do you feel like do you get less as a South Asian woman versus South Asian men?
No, not necessarily. Not here. I mean, India is a different beast, but look, it's hard to be a creative regardless. I think that's the biggest thing, that I have white friends who don't get an agent because there are too many agents who have the exact same brown haired looking white girl that looks like Anne Hathaway. So it's a tough business, and we cannot deny that this is a tough business with limited roles and opportunities for everyone across the board. We're about to hit a writer's strike. And I have friends who said, white friends who say they've had one audition a year. So we are at a time where it actually might be better to be South Asian or brown than it is to be white, if you're new. But if you're established and you have money, because then you get into classism and people, there's a whole other game. But and then comparing myself directly to South Asian males, I have so many South Asian male friends who aren't necessarily just getting more work than me or getting more auditions than me or anything like that. I'm not seeing that sort of imbalance directly within my community. As a filmmaker too, I did not see that sort of imbalance when I did the circuit. It felt to me like, if anything, how I approached the work had a lot more to do with my success. That meant having the sense of resilience that a quote unquote man would have, like sort of keeping, like, shoving my film in people's faces constantly, and emailing so many people and constantly pitching it, is traditionally a male quality, and women tend to shirk away from it. But I did that constantly, and I stood by the film even when people were like, you should be done with this film. And that's the only way I got that film on Disney Hotstar. So I don't know if I don't really think it had to do with a man, or like a woman, or like a male or female thing. If anything, the biggest disadvantage I'm finding between a man and a woman has a lot to do with after I've had a child. Because in my case, I mean, you lose all this time, like getting pregnant, birthing, and if you don't, and childcare is a massive issue, and this big question of how you want to raise your kids and who's going to raise your kids. Like, do we hire a nanny? Does that person do all of the work? I think that's sort of the biggest question of our times, as women work more and more, as we figure out how to become more prominent in the work world. How do we still be there for our children when we are at the prime of our careers, And so it's a tricky, in that way, that's definitely tricky, because, my husband's very supportive, but he is the primary breadwinner because I am a creative, and that has probably, again, more to do with me being a creative than it does with me being a woman.
How do you navigate the balance between honoring your cultural heritage and representation in your work as a South Asian woman?
That is the challenge of our time. That's the challenge of the creative, I think. just sitting down and like brain dumping your thoughts, knowing yourself, knowing what you're thinking, having an opinion. That's your biggest superpower if you're creating any project. And if you're honest to yourself and you're writing and like brain dumping it, you're going to find your culture in there because that's yours, that's most authentic to you. Garba is like a part of my life. But is it a part of my son's life? Again, I don't know because we're in New York City. He's not doing what I did growing up. But how do I bring that into my work now is, yeah, that's always like sort of like, how do you make anything still commercially viable? You could keep making art, but ultimately we want like art to be funded. So how are you going to bring your culture in and also make sure it's funded? But also, again, we're in a time where me telling a story about me related to my culture is much more specific to me and more likely to get funded than me telling a story about somebody else's experience or some other experience that is not actually related to me. The best art has to come from our own experience.
Uh-huh. So you're seeing like a change in like from the past where there's mainly not that much circulation of like people of color and their experiences, and it's getting
Yes.
better. Okay.
Totally. It's like a huge shift in the last like 5, 6 years. I mean, it's like you'll have, it's interesting because you'll see people from like 10 years ago, their short films didn't even have cultural elements. They tried to like whitewash their work. They tried to neutralize it is the best way to put it. Let's make a neutral topic about like something that everyone will like. And then you'll start, nowadays we're seeing a lot more people saying, I'm going to tell a story. Even my thriller, it was like, I'm going to tell you about a story haunted by an Indian classical dancer. Nobody does that. Not here, not in America, not trying to do the circuit here. But that is becoming, it's becoming more common. And that's why never have I ever is like, it works now, but it wouldn't have worked maybe when she did the Mindy project. Do you see what I mean? So it's not even her fault because she's trying to make she needed, things have to be greenlit. Like you can write all you want. If it's not greenlit, I do think white execs still run a lot of like the big offices. And that is definitely a roadblock that we're hitting. But all the work that we've done over the years, all the work that the Mindys of the world have done, the Hasan Minhajes, like they're out there creating, normalizing our culture in a way that allows projects to get greenlit faster. So it's our job now as creatives to go write content and make, go write those stories because this is the moment. This is the moment your thing might get picked up.
Have you found any particular communities or networks have been particularly helpful in supporting your career?
You'd be surprised. A lot of the things I got was from a white person. Is that interesting? So I have a lot of South Asian friends. We talk about this the other day. Sometimes amongst us, we're like, well, actually, the people who gave me that, Elle Magazine did a feature on me as a dancer a couple of years ago. And that was from a white makeup artist, who like was like, hey, I'm doing makeup for this series of dancers. Like, do you want me to refer you? And I was like, yeah. And it was like a whole feature in Elle Magazine. And it was like a huge thing for me and the community at the time, because that was like 6 years ago. Again, we were still everything was still kind of like building. And I was a white person. All the jobs I booked are all through our white people. Like it's not necessarily like, I think uplifting each other is still a bit of a challenge. Like people aren't doing it as much as you think, but also people aren't in positions of greenlighting as much as you think. We're still rising slowly. There are very few Mindys. Like literally there's like one, and that's, I think that's also like realizing that what we need more than ever is writers writing narratives, writing scripts, going out and pitching those scripts and learning how to actually then take those scripts and get them greenlit,
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest challenge for your generation. And that is what you should do because a lot of work has been done by this older generation.
How do you see your role as a South Asian woman in the film industry in terms of inspiring and mentoring the next generation of filmmakers from similar backgrounds?
What I just told you. Go write, send it around, get people to listen, read your scripts, get them to give your feedback, become brave, like create like a rhinoceros type of skin, because they're going to have feedback and they're going to be critical, which is a good thing. And then go make things, go make your first short, go make it happen somehow. Don't go into too much debt, because you're going to need marketing money, and find a way to just tell your stories.
I didn't hear about like the Bengali stereotype before, like being very creative, like artistic.
I don't know,
But
that's just my observation, but that's my personal observation, is that a lot of my Bengali friends, naturally, they grew up in households that have a great appreciation of the arts. One of my friends, she's a poet, but she's also works in finance, but she grew up, she was saying it was so normal to like grow up and Bengal itself is just they like appreciate the theater, they appreciate poetry, they just really appreciate the arts in a way that's very different from the other states of India. It's interesting how history plays a part in it, and what part of India you're from, and what your family does
yeah.
generationally, how it impacts your ability to climb quickly.
What are some key themes or issues you hope to explore more as you become a director and write more?
Identity is definitely one of them. What makes an identity? Who are we really? Like, what is that? What does that even mean? What is identity? I don't even know. And because it is so multifaceted, is it about what country we're from, or is it about like what you ate for dinner every night? Like, what exactly makes you who you are?
Mm-hmm. I watched, have you seen the Marvel show? I think Miss Marvel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's also groundbreaking, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
funny, a friend of mine said it a couple of years ago, and she was joking. She goes, everyone keeps comparing the South Asian community to the Black community, but they have a Black Panther. And we don't even have a Marvel thing. And Miss Marvel came out a couple of years later, and we were like, okay.
Yeah.
Progress is being made.
I really thought it was so cool, like how they incorporated like the partition, because I actually didn't know a whole lot about the partition. And so like seeing just how like traumatizing it was for all these people to just leave to like a completely different place. Like it was really like, whoa. And they did it within like a Marvel show. And I was like, that's crazy.
I think embracing that was so key to like recognizing that this isn't just a simple story of like a bunch of doctors and lawyers coming up here, landing up here. And and that's a key part of like identity, like going back that far. And yeah, it's great. I learned a lot about partition. I think as children born here, we're really truly like we don't really know exactly like what went down there, and we don't truly realize how it impacts who we are today and the choices our parents make here and why they make those choices. And I think having like a clear understanding of also like world economy is still important, even though we're artists, because it allows you to really create narratives that are actually a part of the cultural zeitgeist. Because the economy and like the political things that are happening impact the work that gets greenlit, the work that gets seen, and also will help you understand what people want to see, because their lives are impacted by the economics of the world as well. Does that make sense? It's complicated.
I've run out of all my questions. So do you have any last things you want to say?
No, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds
Have a
good.
good day. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, Sushmita.
Of course. Bye. Gayatri's experience gave me a lot of hope and confidence, but we do have different backgrounds when it comes to our upbringings. That being said, it reminded me that despite sharing the same gender and racial identity, there are still differences amongst the South Asian community that gives others more privilege. I want to get the experience of someone who is similar in age to me, so I got in touch with a friend who just graduated last semester from Barnard. Do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Anu. I recently graduated from Barnard with a film major, so I'm currently, I guess, in the line between like just getting out of college and going to start looking for what I want to do with my job and stuff. and where I want to be in the film industry, if at all. And yeah, that's kind of it. I guess like it might be important to mention, like, I was born in India, I was raised in India, I lived a little bit abroad when I was like in elementary school, and then I came to the United States when I was in middle school, like the end of middle school, and I spent high school here. So my kind of understanding of my identity as like someone who's Indian, South Asian descent is probably a little bit different than someone who like grew up in India, or like someone who kind of grew up here but is of South Asian descent. So I kind of lie somewhere in the middle.
What made you interested in the film industry?
I was never that interested. I never really understood like what the craft of filmmaking was until I like started paying more attention. Specifically like someone like Wes Anderson, who is probably a very common space person of inspiration for a lot of people, but for me it was like this mix of both like visual art kind of with the importance of like the shots you're making. So you have cinematography and then the sound design and the music that would be in his films. All of that put together kind of made me realize, well, film is something where you can do so much. Like it's really like a multidisciplinary kind of field. And as someone who like, I never was someone who could like fit into like labels. I can't just do like visual arts. I enjoy like dancing, for example. Like I need something that can like fit all my kinds of interests and the things I like to do and how I like to express myself. So I thought film is like the thing that I think can bring all of that together. So I don't know, slowly like as more I learned about film, I thought about taking classes when I went to college. In my first semester, I couldn't get into any classes that related to film, but I happened to get to work on a set, which was actually like a set with just women, which was kind of pretty empowering to like see women working behind the camera. They're all student filmmakers, but for them it was like they knew they wanted to do film. They were putting a lot of their energy into these things, and I kind of realized like it seems a lot of fun. I had fun on set. I enjoyed it a lot, so I was like, you know what? I can do this too. And that's kind of where it started, I guess.
How did your cultural background and identity shape your interest in pursuing a career in the film industry?
I don't think I ever thought a lot about my cultural identity cultural background and my identity when I first thought about film and like pursuing it. Like to me, I guess when you think about like representation of like me on camera, right? I grew up with like in India where there's a huge industry, and that's just Bollywood industry. There's so much more than that, and so for me, like I would always see people that look like me on screen. So, but then the more I like kind of focused on outside of Bollywood and in spaces where like I was there, you know, like more indie cinema here in the United States, I kind of started to see like there's a gap, right? There's stories that aren't being told that relate to not just like my story, I guess, but to people who seem like me, who are like me, who look like they're like me, but they have widely different stories than me. And the more like I started learning about it, the more research I did, the more I kind of realized like it's an issue. It's like a representation is a problem, and that just goes for like every minority group, every oppressed group, especially within the United States. So I wouldn't say like my thought process was, oh, I'm gonna be like the next big Indian director, like I have to be that person, like I need to fill that role which is empty. I think for me it started to change my thinking into less about like, oh, there's this space empty for a female Indian blank to do something, I should do that. It's more about I want to be someone who empowers different stories to be told and to allow people of different backgrounds who don't see themselves on screen to see themselves on screen and be able to tell those stories. So for me, like if I am to like push myself into the industry, I want to be, my ideal position would be in a space where I would be able to bring in people to the, I guess like bringing people to the table, you know, give them a spot on the table and empower people to like really express themselves and really create like a diverse range of stories where we wouldn't actually have to have these conversations of whether there's good representation or bad representation. They're just, everyone exists and everyone can see themselves. So that's kind of how myself as an Indian person, you know, within an industry, which I don't see myself a lot, is like I want to make sure everyone can see themselves there.
What challenges do you anticipate facing as a South Asian woman entering the film industry, and how do you plan to address them?
I think one thing which I feel like is probably something that lots of people who are in a minority identity might relate to is that you kind of get pigeonholed and you kind of get put into a certain box because of your identity. So it's like, for example, like if I'm an Indian woman, right, there is this assumption that the stories I will be best to tell, the stories I can only tell, are the ones that involve Indian women, which like isn't bad. I think that's good, right? But that's also like, I don't think every single person who identifies as an Indian woman only wants to tell stories about Indian women, right? They don't only want to work on projects that are only about this one part of them. So I think that's something I think I anticipate like would be something I'd fall into, is that you kind of be pushed into this box or into this corner of making things that, yes, you want to make, but at the same time it's not just your full scope. And I say that because, like, you know, you'd see, like, if you talk about like the most common demographic of people that work in like Hollywood, for example, a white cis male, they get stories, they get to tell all sorts of stories, one about themselves, all different arrays of stories about themselves, but then they're also given tasks to tell stories about other communities. They get to work on things with other communities, and there's a reason we don't bat an eye at it, because we don't think about bringing on people who can tell those stories. But at the same time, it's like they've made themselves such a norm in the industry that them being proliferated across different sorts of projects and stuff is just kind of a norm. So like I want it to be, it's a norm for you to see like someone like me in every different kind of set. Like it doesn't just have to be a set that's dedicated to a story that's about someone like me. I can work anywhere. I know like a challenge would be like, oh, people wouldn't be interested in seeing stories about me, right? I don't think, that's not something I'm worried about, because for me it's like, if I have a story to tell, there will be someone willing to tell it. Now the problem is, you know, if you're telling the story which you're going to a producer, a production company, you're asking them to make it, are they going to give you the money for it? Right? Are they going to give you the resources to make this the best that it can be if it's not something that apparently people want to see because of the story it's telling that's not going to relate to a large group of people? That is a problem that exists within the industry, and hopefully it's something that will change as more and more people, like audiences, can kind of shift narratives and show that, you know, people see this. Like, I think with like Black Panther, you know, there's this, when Black Panther came out, it was one of the biggest grossing movies. I still think it might be one of the top charts maybe when it comes to like of its genre. And people realize like, no, people want to see movies about Black people, like being main characters, leading their own stories, you know, being told by Black people, that kind of thing. So maybe the more and more stories come out like this, the less you'd have to worry about issues of not having enough resources and stuff being directed to us. But I think that would also be another thing that I would anticipate.
What struggles are you facing right now since you've graduated?
I mean, those struggles, I haven't actually started looking for stuff at the moment, so I don't think I can say I'm facing any struggles.
Or what fears do you have?
What fears do I have? So I don't have this like really answers to the question in terms of like me entering the industry, but I do know, like, because of how little representation exists of people like me and like stories of people like me, there's kind of possibly there's a kind of standard to what is being looked for to count as like good representation to put out, right? Like I did an internship with a really cool company, which a lot of their focus was on like Indian stories and bringing them for like a Western Hollywood audience. So a lot of this, and I did script coverage, so I would like read scripts that would come in and give my thoughts on them and to the producers who would eventually think about producing it or not. And a lot of the scripts that would come into this company would be like specifically scripts about like either based in India or like scripts about the Indian diaspora. And something I kind of noticed when I would like discuss with the producers and my supervisors, when I would talk to them about the scripts after I read them, there's such like little guarantee that these stories being like stories that are based in a foreign country, you know, stories of a minority group, of their stories, to put a risk on putting money towards that, like it really has to reach a certain standard for it to be like, okay, yes, we're definitely going to like put this out like this, because you have to take, with everything that you do in the industry, like you have to take a risk when it comes to the production side of things, right? If you're going to put money towards something to get made, it's a risk. You're hoping that it will turn out a profit in the end. I think there is some kind of level of, like an extra level for these stories to like jump through, like extra hoops that these stories can have to jump through, and that they need to be able to be a representation that is, I guess, indicative of like a good representation, you know? Obviously, like if we're gonna have stories coming out that could be awesome stories, but you know, people like me are always put as like terrible villains, that's not great representation, right? That's just because there's such few stories of us in the media itself that you end up creating this bubble of just this one narrative of what people like me could be.
How do you feel about Mindy Kaling?
Mindy Kaling, I mean, I respect her as like being a very prominent South Asian female figure within the industry. I mean, she's a producer, she's a writer, she also did a lot, I guess, for like female comedy itself within TV writing rooms and such. So like she deserves the respect for that, I think, definitely. I haven't really watched a lot of her stuff, so I can't comment on a lot of the critiques people have about the way she portrays culture and characters and that such. But I think we are allowed to critique her on the way she portrays things, but I think we're also allowed to say that she doesn't have to tell every story. She's allowed to tell the same story again and again if she wants. If she has one experience with being South Asian in America, she's allowed to do that again. She's allowed to tell that story if she wants. She's allowed to tell it in her way if she wants. So she needs to make sure, like, she brings on people who will allow those stories to be diversified. I think that, like, it goes back to the idea, like, we don't have that much representation on screen. And so any bit of representation we do have on screen faces a lot of scrutiny, because you're holding, it's the weight of such a large demographic. Like, even when you say South Asian, like, South Asian has so much to it, you know? You can break that down into being Indian, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from Sri Lanka, right? Then within that, you have very different sects which exist in those countries. Within that, like India, for example, I have one experience that comes from one small part of the country. There is like there's so many other languages, so many other cultures. And then I'm just talking about like in the subcontinent. Then you bring all that to America, for example, if we're focusing on like American representation. There are such different experiences people have because of the religion they have, of the way they express their culture, the way they're perceived by others because of those two former things. So there's so much weight to the word South Asian representation, right? And the only way to kind of mend that is to just keep making sure that we have people of all these different backgrounds, of all these various stories, being empowered and having the resources to tell their stories. So Mindy Kaling can't do that herself. you know, we need to make sure that there are other people that, like, either people like Mindy Kaling in positions of power, can bring people to the table and help diversify the different stories that are told.
How do you think your college education has prepared you for a career in the film industry, and what skills or knowledge do you think will be the most important for your success in this field?
I think I'm someone who actually enjoys like learning. I like academia, so for me, like, the one thing that I really got out of my film classes in college was like learning about theory, learning about history. I think those things are important to me as a creator to know kind of what is the weight of everything that we're seeing today and what new things I can add to it. But I don't think you need to like have a college film school education to be able to jump into the film industry. The most experience you're gonna get is like being on set, like actually working on sets, working with people who have had experience, talking to those people. I think the times when I've learned the most is been when I've been like on set and I've been doing things rather than sitting in lectures and kind of just taking in information. So I think for the film industry, like, my best experiences have come out of actually like either working in the industry if that's like an internship, or like working on a film if that's like on set, even if it was like a short film. Those are the things that really, really propelled me forward. And a lot of those experiences like taught me that, being able to make quick decisions, being able to adapt to different changes, having good social skills, those things are very, very important within the industry, at least like parts of the industry that I have been in contact with so far. And I think that's why I like film a lot, is because it's a very collaborative thing. You're constantly working with others, and it's, all these people will come together for 3 days, 12 hours a day. You're working on just this one thing, and then you all just disperse after it. It's done. And it's like this euphoria and adrenaline rush when you're in it, and then once it's done, it's like this kind of almost this calm that occurs. It's a very interesting feeling, and you have to like enjoy that to really kind of thrive working on set like that. My other experience I had was like I said, interning with the company where I was doing coverage for them, and that was all fully remote. So I never met the people in person that I was working with, who were my supervisors. And that required me to learn a lot about kind of communication, being good to communicate, especially if they were in a different time zone than I was. So that was really important. I think also being able to be succinct and quick, especially when it comes to stuff like before things even get slated to be made. When things are being like in the development stage, it's a lot about if they're trying to go through 100 scripts that are coming through, right? And your job is to read those scripts and tell them what's good and what's bad. You need to understand story quickly. You need to understand what makes a story tick, what makes a story good, what makes it interesting, and be able to succinctly relay that to the person who is supervising you in that sense, who has to make that decision in the end. So that taught me a lot about like kind of being able to pick out important parts of a story and be able to be well spoken in how I explain things and present my opinions and thoughts. But that's just like, those are skills I've learned just by doing like 2 different experience things, right? There's so many other things that you can do within the film industry, and like, so for me, I'm just like, I can go choose to do anything, and I know I'm going to learn something new, and it's going to teach me a different skill. And bundling all those together is what hopefully will give me enough knowledge to keep working on bigger projects and bigger things.
Who would you say are the people that are preventing more like South Asian representation in the film industry?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think a lot of it starts at the development stage, right? So you have like, all sorts of people are trying to get their stories told. Okay, you're like, say for example me, I'm writing a script for, say, I'm not actually writing a script, but say I'm writing a script, it's a story about me, very close to my culture, my experiences, I wanted to get it made. Unless like I make it myself, right? Or I have like close friends, you know, who have money and we have the resources and we have networking to make it. My only option is to submit it to production companies and hope that someone there is going to think this is worth making. So I don't know if I want to say like, oh, those people are stopping us from getting into the industry, but it does start there, especially when it comes to like Hollywood level kind of productions. It starts at the development stage. And so, and the other problem is like you have hundreds of, maybe thousands of scripts being sent to these people per day. So they need something that's gonna, like I said, like if they take a risk with it, it's going to make a good profit in the end. But also like it'll be interesting. People will want to watch it. So unfortunately, I guess maybe that means stories about us aren't profitable. That's why they're not being made, because I can tell you like people are writing those and they're being sent to these people. But I think it's just a matter of someone taking a chance. Either someone taking a chance on it or someone deliberately being like, no, we need to get this made because it's important to have this story be told. But I don't know if I would say like I know, if I could say exactly who was trying to. If there's like a villainous person sitting at the top of Hollywood being like, no, letting these people come in here. You know, like, I don't know if I have an answer for that, I guess, but.
Who else would you say is involved in that process of, like, who gets what? Like, besides just, like, the development people, like, saying yes and no? Because you said Mindy Kaling could do better and, like, hire more diverse people, like.
Yeah, so I guess that's a good point. So, like, say you're a showrunner for a TV show, right? A showrunner's job, a lot of the times, especially for, like, head writer, as well as a showrunner, is to bring in writers into a writer's room for the TV show. So if you decide to fill your writer's room with a very, like, all white people, right? Your show is going to be indicative of stories that only they can tell. So a lot of the work can be done there where they choose to bring in people of different, like, backgrounds to be able to have a more diverse, writer room where they can tell lots of different kinds of stories in this TV show. That's just like one example. And then I think like honestly like everywhere if you think about it, like if you're a showrunner and you're looking for directors for your episodes, you can choose to bring in specific directors especially if like an episode for example is focused on a specific character who that director might be able to relate more to and be able to tell that story in a richer way. So I think in every single aspect of it, you can just have more people, bring in more people. I think that's the issue with the industry, is that a lot of it is like who you know, who you can bring in. That's really how it kind of works. There's no, like, yeah, there's applications and stuff, but most of the time it's who you worked with in the past, and if you trust them to bring them on to this next project. I don't know if like you can like fault people for not working with as diverse amount of people as they can, because that's just a matter of chance. It's who you get to work with. So if we're thinking about ways to increase the, I guess, representation of people not just on screen but behind the camera as well, we have to have like very deliberate choices being made by people who have the power to bring on people for roles. You know, sometimes that ends up being the producer on a film or something, and they have to do their kind of job to be like, I specifically want to reach out to this person of, like, say for example in my case, someone who's a South Asian female, to come on and work on this project, because I know that their background as being Indian, for me example, like that will allow them to give the story a richer level that we might not have had if it wasn't the case.
Would you say there are more people impacted besides just South Asian women because there's no representation or a lack of representation?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say like any group that's underrepresented in Hollywood, which is basically anyone who's not white. Even white women aren't actually that representation in a lot of technical aspects either, but I think any underrepresented group, basically who's not a white man, I think it's like, it might be different for different cases, because we might might be having like a shift in certain groups in the way they're being portrayed and how they're being able to tell more stories, which just other groups haven't caught up to. But at the end of the day, it's like if we want an industry which we don't even have to think about representation because we just see everyone everywhere, I think that requires every single group that's left behind to be kind of pushed forward and empowered.
How can we center the voices of South Asian American women? Because you did say it's up to like the people who accept your script, but how can we get them to do that?
That's a really good question. Honestly, I don't know. I wish I knew more about how the industry worked and the ways you can manipulate it to kind of help stuff like this. I think the best we can do is just show them that we're here, you know? If you're writing a script, then write that script and send it as much as you can. Get people to notice that it's a good script and those stories need to be told, Unfortunately, like, if we don't have any resources, then the next best thing we can do is just try our best without the resources. We have to show them that, on one side, we have to show them that there are people who are talented and creative and are passionate to tell these stories and bring them to a larger audience. But on the other side, we also have to show them that there is an audience that wants this, right? That we want to see these stories being told. And that, even any small bit that we can see it's good. It's a good step in the right direction. So I think it's like those two kind of sides of the spectrum where it's like from both the production side, from the creative side, but also from the viewer side, the audience side. Unfortunately, like any other capitalist industry, Hollywood and like anything else that trickles out from it is based on profit, right? So things need to seem profitable. Now, what does profit mean, right? Is that we're gonna have an audience that will be interested in seeing it, and it'll give us profit back after it gets distributed and released. So, we need to make sure that we are vocal that we want this. We want this. I think we're being vocal. We're always being vocal, but we just have to keep trying.
And what are some potential outcomes you think can arise from seeing more South Asian representation?
One, I think, it changes the perspective of people. One, people who aren't familiar with South Asian people, they can learn that, they're not just the approved that are like in The Simpsons, right? Or they're not just like Mindy in the Mindy Project. Like, they're not just doctors in every single sitcom that show up for just like one episode. They can be a lot more things than that, which is usually the point of representation, is to increase, I guess, is to fight against the tropes that kind of oppress us and put us into like small boxes and corners. So that is one outcome, of course. And of course, like, another outcome is just, we can see ourselves and think, yeah, we can do a lot. Like, we can do a lot more. We can be on screen. We can be actors. We can be directors, I think a lot of times it's like not seeing yourself somewhere. You don't even think that you can do that. I know I experienced that as a kid, right? So I think there is something to be said about the power of seeing your own image being reflected back to you in a position that you never even considered, and it could change your mind. It could empower you to do something, whether it's that thing or something else. Which would just mean like more people entering the industry, more people fighting for their place, for their stories to be told. So there's only positives that can come out of it, in my book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Listening to Anu and Gayatri's words was very insightful. Not only is my identity very important to me, but so are the people I choose to surround myself with, as well as the activities I partake in. It is time to challenge the stereotypical representations we have been confined to for decades. Whether we do it by learning and unlearning ideas and biases, amplifying the voices of South Asian communities all over the world, or creating a safe and inclusive space for those sharing their lived experience. It it is time to honor the rich culture, history, and stories of South Asian people, both on and off screen. For now, I'll continue writing my stories that'll hopefully leave an impact on people, just like how my Didi Ma impacted me.
Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Bye bye.